interview.
Hey everyone, this is Randolph here. We're in New York City checking out the latest build of Homefront. We've got to talk to a few of the Kaos Studios developers about the game, so let's go hear from them right now. The shooter genre is a fairly contested field out there. Well, what do you think will set Homefront apart when you release it later?
I think there's a few things. One of the big ones really is our premise and our setting. You know, the Occupation USA story. It's something that really hasn't been done in the way that we're doing it. It's a USA that you'll never have seen before. There's certainly some gameplay innovations. A lot of those are on the multiplayer side. Right now we're talking mostly about single player, but you know, we really wanted to create this what if scenario. What if the US was occupied? It's really not about saying this is going to happen. It's about saying what if it did happen. And inspirations that came from movies like Red Dawn and John Milius on the project really is kind of where this phrase that we go by, it's kind of the X for our world. It's called the familiar has become alien. So places you lived in, grew up, you know, shopped, that either as an American or as an international familiar with those places from TV and film, you know, what would it, when you see those and they're twisted by this occupation and the energy crisis and sort of the collapse, you know, how does that make you feel, and is that an interesting world to play in? And so far we found it really engaging, and it's just created tons of ideas for us that, you know, you don't really see anywhere else.
Now, of course, the whole situation with North Korea now gives it an eerie resonance, the game. How do you think the game will be received, you know, if things, you know, flare up over there?
Well, it's certainly going to get attention, right? I mean, it's really uncanny because at E3 last year they started doing nuclear tests just before E3. Right now there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. It's, you know, just before E3. I don't know if they're like reading our backstory or what's going on, but I mean, I'm not too worried about it. It's they have a very interesting mindset. They're very anti-US, at least the regime is, and you know, so in some ways that they make a perfect catalyst for this sort of larger Korean Federation that spreads over the next 15 years to lead into our story. So,
what type of action are you promising to deliver when the game comes out later?
Well, really, our game is about selling this unique core fantasy that's not out there in the marketplace right now, which is you are a civilian in an occupied United States who's forced to take up arms against your oppressor in a fight for freedom. And really the unique vibe we're bringing is that the player is not a professional soldier, and the squad he works with are not professional soldiers. These are civilians, and they have very human reactions to warfare, and they make mistakes that professional soldiers wouldn't make, and that's really what's unique about Homefront, sort of the big difference between us and our competitors.
So how does that, I guess, work out in terms of action? Like, how do you try to differentiate yourselves from the other shooters that are out there?
So what you'll find in the other shooters is almost always the protagonist and his squad have the technological and numerical advantage. Our game is flipped. There's only 5 of you, and all their other resistance cells are very scattered and they're not unified. So when you have an attack or when you perform an action, the enemy almost always has overwhelming response. Better numbers, better equipment, more firepower. So you're almost constantly on the run in this game. Even when you do an attack, you pretty much have to pull out immediately because the enemy sends an overwhelming response.
Now, you talked about, I guess, companions that you'll be battling with. Are you able to control them at all as squads, or do they have their own routines?
No, they have their own AI. They're each autonomous. They actually each have their own character. They each have their own weapon, their own fighting style.
We've got Tae Kim, who's the creative consultant for Kaos Studios. He's basically the guy who helped dream up the scenario of what happens in Homefront. So I guess the big question there, Tae, is how is it possible that someone like North Korea can eventually invade and, you know, take over the United States?
Well, we're not actually talking about the possibility per se. We are bringing the players into the future, the presence of the game, and basically we want to tell the game players that how this transpired. And so I think the THQ creative team and the Kaos creative team has created a very detailed and I would say plausible timeline of how the events transpire in next 15 to 17 years to bring you to the world of Homefront, of how a country that's kind of destitute eventually is able to mount a occupation force that lands in the United States, and during that process you have a very incremental power growth that North Korea goes through, via military and economic gains through occupying territories territories, unifying South Korea, taking over Japan, and having other Asian nations join them in a quasi-economic and military alliance, and basically launching a surprise attack against Hawaii and basically landing in the West Coast.
Now, I guess one of the big names you brought on board is writer John Milius to help you, I guess, frame the world of Homefront. Like, how did you guys get involved with him?
Well, John Milius was the only writing teacher I ever had back in the day. So, and we became friendly about 10 or 11 years ago on a government project that we were working together as consultants. He's one of my favorite writers. Apocalypse Now, Wind and the Lion, Conan, Red Dawn. He's got such a great point of view, and he's also a military history buff, as I am also. So when we approached the game with John was easy for him to get really engaged in what's guerrilla warfare. I mean, he talks about Geronimo and the Apaches when he talks about guerrilla warfare. He talks about the Filipinos in World War II. We engage in a lot of history, and the sequence you saw today with the white phosphorus and the van playing the music and drawing them in and burning them and all that, that's all John. That wasn't anybody here. That was John's stuff.